good morning, good afternoon, good night, whether you're joining us asynchronously or watching it live with us. Thank you for being here. This is our panel on what you can do with a PhD. So we'll be talking about careers in academia as well as other options. And so we have a great set of panelists here to answer your questions and share their experiences. So Dr. Marguerite Nguyen, so she is the Associate Professor of English, or an Associate Professor of English from Wesleyan University. We also have Dr. Edgardo Sanabria-Valentín. He is the Associate Director of the Program for Research Initiatives in Science and Math. So this is at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice at the City University of New York. And then we also have Dr. Phillip Thomas, who is a postdoctoral fellow at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals. So to kind of kick us off, I would like to have each of them share a little bit about what they do currently and how they got to this path.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Marguerite Nguyen, and I'm very happy to be here and looking forward to this conversation. So I am an associate professor of English at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. And my job basically entails, I'm at a liberal arts college, so it's a small school. It's about 3,000 undergraduates. So I primarily research my areas of specialization, which include Asian American literature, Vietnamese American literature, and critical refugee studies. And then I teach 2 courses per semester, so 4 total courses for the year. And as with, a lot of academics these days, much of my time is also occupied by administrative work. So I do things like serve on search committees to hire new faculty. For 4 years, I coordinated our department's curriculum, which meant that I was sort of like organizing the courses, making sure that there were enough courses for students to take, meeting student requests for courses, and making sure that we had enough courses for students to complete the English major. So I would say those are the 3 things that I do, mainly at Wesleyan: research, which also includes, writing articles and publishing, research, teaching, administrative work, and I also do a lot of mentorship and advising. I guess the short version of how I got to this path was, as a high school student and an undergraduate, I always had really loved literature and felt a sort of natural, literature was sort of naturally appealing to me. I loved reading and I loved writing. But I also received a very canonical kind of literary education. I was born and raised in Virginia Beach after my parents, who were refugees from the Vietnam War, were resettled there. And it was an area with not many Southeast Asians. And so I was always very curious about their histories because they told me a lot of stories about their past growing up. And I think I was just very, I really wanted to figure out what place those stories held, I think, in my life and beyond my own life, and sort of more broadly in the public discourse. And after pursuing an English undergraduate degree, I decided that graduate school was the best way for me to pursue those questions. And we can talk more about that in a bit, but basically I pursued a graduate degree in English, and I really didn't know what I was doing. I did not have plans to become a professor. I didn't know really what a PhD entailed, but it all kind of worked out. And there were definitely sort of twists and turns along the way, but I am where I am now. So that's the short version.
I guess I'll go next. My name is Phillip Thomas. I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals up in Tarrytown, New York. So for those of you who have not been to New York City, we are located right outside of New York City in an area called Westchester County. And so within Regeneron, I sit in our oncology department, and the research that I'm focused on primarily is involved in trying to understand what are the genes that certain cancer cells express that either make them less sensitive, right, or more resistant to various immunotherapies. And the way we go about trying to figure out what these genes are through the use of genome-wide CRISPR screens. And so we can get more into that if people are interested. I would say prior to coming to Regeneron, I did my PhD at NYU School of Medicine in New York City. And prior to that, I did my undergrad at North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro, North Carolina. I think just starting off on my scientific journey, I think once I got to A&T was really where my love for academics came out. Coming into college, I consider myself a lost student. But one of the things that I think, always kept me going was this drive never to fail. And so I think that once I got to college, I understood, hey, this is the path for you to finish, right? Academics became a big focus for me. And I was really interested in going into medicine. I think for a lot of African American students, if you are good at either science, right? One of the things your parents are going to tell you, you need to go be a doctor, right? But a lot of times it's because we don't know the other options. So as I was pursuing medicine, I had a really great mentor that told me, hey, one of the things that students do if they're interested in medicine is they need to do something over the summer instead of just going to summer school. And so one of the options was to pursue a research experience. And so one of my first research experiences was with the Leadership Alliance. I was actually placed at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. And I really think that experience opened up my eyes to what I could do with research. And I think it aligned more with my own viewpoints, which was I had a knack or a passion for discovery. And when I kind of thought about the MD versus the PhD at that point in time, I really started to think about, hey, I don't want to ever be pigeonholed to the fact of I'm walking in a patient's room and there may be an opportunity where I say, we don't have anything else to treat what you have, right? I wanted to be more in a space where it was, we are seeking to discover, these cures for things that currently don't have any sorts of treatment or incurable diseases. And so I thought the scientific discovery route was where I wanted to be. And so that led me to go to NYU. And I think throughout my time at NYU, what used to get me in trouble a little bit was I always kept asking the question of why, right? And in a sense of why being, well, why are we studying this? Why are we doing this? How is this going to help change somebody's life? How is this going to help save somebody's grandmother, right? And I think that from that experience, I knew pretty early on that whatever I ended up doing at my next stage, I didn't want to sit just primarily in this academic space where a lot of things at some places or in certain labs was just purely, hey, we're seeking to understand the knowledge. Even though I do understand people push back and say basic science fuels a lot of the discovery, that's completely true. But I knew for me, I wanted to be in a place where the research was more applied, right? Where it was directly, we are doing this to help turn this into a product that will help somebody. And so that really led me to want to pursue my postdoc at an industry setting. It was something that I really didn't know was an option, but in New York City, Regeneron recruits a lot from the schools in the city. And so they have this big conference every year called the Regeneron Science to Medicine Forum, where they give students the opportunity to come tour Regeneron. They talk more about the postdoctoral program. And I think that that's how I really got interested to say, this is a step or this is a place that I would like to pursue my postdoc at. And so far, it's been great, learned a ton. And I'm actually kind of in the same boat as you guys. I'm finishing up the postdoc and trying to figure out what I want to do next with my career. So happy to be here.
Okay. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today. So what do I do day to day? I am the Associate Director of our Program for Research Initiatives in Science and Math at John Jay. I am part of the administrative staff at the college. And what in John Jay is part of the City University, and in our parlance, I am a higher education officer. In my specific role, I do everything from grant management. I have my own grants to run the program, and I also manage the funds and some of the activities for some of our larger institutional grants. And also I run my own undergraduate research program at John Jay, which serves about 40 to 45 students a year that work in research in STEM fields. At John Jay, we educate fierce advocates for justice. So most of our research is related to that field, from criminal justice, toxicology, molecular biology. I like to define those as you need to know where the bullet came from, what did they use to poison you, and who's the baby daddy or the murderer that left as a blood sample, one of the two. And also in computer science and cybersecurity. So in that role, I lead the programmatic approaches of the program. So I have a staff of about 5 people that we manage several programs ranging from academic support all the way to undergraduate research and professional development. And I also serve as a pre-health advisor for John Jay. So how did I got here? I would love to say that it was a straightforward line. It wasn't. It was pretty much throughout my career, I discovered what I liked, what I was good at, and I tried to focus on that. I did my undergrad at Universidad de Puerto Rico in Mayagüez. And over there, I majored in microbiology. One of the reasons I was a nerd, I love science, and I wanted to study science, but I didn't have an outlook of what I wanted to do with it at all, besides this idea that I wanted to be a scientist. I had no one in my family that studied, was in any STEM field, although I'm not first generation. My mother is a college graduate, but I knew college was in my cards, but I had no one to guide me towards what do you do as a scientist. So it was through doing programs like, for example, I did the Leadership Alliance at NYU that I began to see myself less as a student and more as a practitioner of science. That I could apply what I learned in the classroom to the real world problems, and through these programs, and because of the Leadership Alliance, I applied to graduate school, and in graduate school, I got to serve as a grad student as the grad student assistant to the NYU Summer Undergraduate Research Program. I don't know if there's any SR-EIPs in the house. Many years ago this was. And because of that, I got to, while I was in grad school, start working with students one-on-one and also in groups, and learn the behind the scenes of how do you prepare a scientist, how do you train a scientist, how do you help students identify what is it that they should be doing. I was able to do that for part of my graduate school. Then at the end of grad school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I applied to a bunch of jobs in higher education without any sort of path. And my mentor, Dr. Joel Oppenheim, caught up with me once and told me, you need to stop applying for jobs. You need to go get a postdoc. You need to find out what type of scientist you are before you figure out how you're going to use the training that you're just finishing. So I did a postdoc at Harvard Medical School, and I got to learn that I am the type of scientist that cares more about the problem than about the answer. I like fixing things. I like figuring out how to get stuff done. So I kept developing all these research projects, where the fun part for me was developing the assays that we were going to use and making sure they work. And then I lost interest and just hand them out to somebody else. And because of that, my mentor over there, my PI over there, suggested, look, I think this is a good skill set for industry. So although I know that you want to go back to teach, there's this opportunity in a company that I advise that is just starting. They're looking for a first employee. They only have funding for 3 months. So what I'll do is, if they're not funded, I'll guarantee you your spot for a few more months. You can come back to the lab. Go and try it out. And I started with that company as employee number 1 as a contractor. We were within 5 months, we were fully funded on a round A. And I worked with them until they started working on the round B on the development of the technology. And a lot of my work was figuring out, does what the idea that we have work as a product? can we transform this technology into something that can be used, we decided at the end, on the food industry. I work then as a consultant for a company in biotech, particularly when you work in startups. It depends on when do they need your skill sets. So once they didn't need anyone with my specialization, they told me, thank you very much. Here's your severance package. Good luck. So I went and started working as a consultant. And during that time, this opportunity to come back to John Jay arrived. I had taught at John Jay in grad school. And what they basically told me is we have this undergraduate research program. We got funding from the Department of Education, and the college wants to institutionalize the program. So they're going to commit the money for our staff so that the program can survive if we lose the grants, for example, and that we can provide these services to students no matter what. And it's been now 10 years this year. I've been able to move from being the undergraduate research coordinator to now being the associate director. And yeah, this story is like 45 minutes. There's a lot of other things that I'm skipping, but yeah, that's how I find myself where I am.
Wonderful. Thank you all for sharing that. I guess I would say we got multiple questions about this one area of deciding between pursuing a PhD and a master's. So I guess if each of you could kind of share from your perspective from your fields, what might be some advantages and disadvantages of pursuing a PhD or a master's?
Why don't you start? Yeah, Marguerite. Sorry, let me.
Oh, it's totally fine. For me, it was a sort of easy question because the program, I went to Berkeley for my PhD and they didn't have a master's in English. And for whatever reason, I just thought it would be best for me to go directly into a PhD program. But I would say that, like, I think if somebody's unsure about, like, do I want to pursue, I'm speaking from a humanities perspective. Do I really want to go to graduate school for an English PhD, because the job market, to be honest, is incredibly tough. And the profession is changing a lot. An MA might be a good way to explore how you like it, and to see, like, if, researching and a commitment to research and teaching is sort of your cup of tea. I think that funding has a lot to do with it. So I think for sure, like with any program, MA or PhD, you just have to be very attentive to what the funding is like. So I know that since I went to graduate school, which is, a while ago, I think a lot of programs have shrunk their literature or English departments. And that's partly because they don't want to kind of flood the market with PhDs who can't find jobs, but also because a lot of these programs want to be able to guarantee funding for those students. So I do think an MA is a good way to go if you're sort of unsure and kind of want to explore, what is the research and teaching side of academia is like, but also get a taste of what the bureaucratic and behind the scenes, dimensions of academic life is like. I have had some students go into MA programs because they maybe had their heart set on certain PhD programs and didn't get in the first time around, and so opted to take an MA, which was actually very helpful for some of them because it ended up changing the direction that they wanted to go in. So, like, I had a student who thought, he wanted to go for a PhD in English or comparative literature, ended up doing an MA in history in the Philippines, and then is now pursuing a PhD in history at Northwestern. So I think if there's any sort of uncertainty about what you want to do regarding graduate research and teaching, an MA would be a good choice, but only if you're funded, I think, because it gets expensive and you don't want to be in debt,
I think I can jump in next, and I think I'll speak just primarily from the industry side of things. I think when you're teetering between these two, like, hey, do I want to go the master's route or the PhD route? When I was considering being in industry, I was very naive to the fact that I thought if you wanted to do research and at a pharmaceutical company, you needed a PhD because those were the people that did the research. And that's not necessarily true. And again, I'm speaking general. This there may be little nuances there. Usually the way that things are set up at, at pharmaceutical companies, usually the PhDs will do the experiment sometimes, but their primary job is to think and communicate the science, right? So they are driving the program. So they're thinking of, hey, these are the type of experiments that we're going to do. This is the big question we want to ask. They're responsible a lot of times for the particular asset that they're working on and things of that nature. And usually people with masters or bachelors, they are the people that are actually executing the experiments, right? And so there are opportunities, right? If you have a master's to get to that point where potentially you will be managing people, thinking of experiments, but it's going to take a lot longer, right? And so usually with the master's, you're gonna need a ton of experience to be able to get to the same level of where the PhD is. And even then, there may be a glass ceiling that you'll have a pretty tough time breaking through. But again, it sometimes in certain places can be overcome with enough experience. And so I think, for the industry setting, you really have to ask yourself that question of, do I want to be in charge? And is that a goal for me? Or am I comfortable kind of being in this position where, I could eventually work my way up, but I'll never probably be the head honcho. And that's not your goal, then, you could definitely have a great career. You can make some pretty decent money as well. Just, having a master's or a bachelor's. And then sometimes this can be a little bit different, in the startup space, right? Because there may be more opportunities, maybe more time for you to get that experience to climb up higher because you're developing with the product versus usually at an established company, you may not get that opportunity. And so those will be kind of the big things that I say. And the other thing that I like to tell people is that I'm like, there's nothing wrong with potentially if you're interested in industry and you can break in, either straight out of undergrad or after a master's, you could take that time, dip your foot in the pond, see if you like research in the industry setting. And if you see, hey, I want to continue to climb, you can go back to school. But one of the things that I also like to tell people is that you have to, when you do something like that, you have to watch your lifestyle. And this is kind of getting more practical because once you get out, you start making money, your lifestyle creeps, you start buying things that you have to pay for. So you can't leave a position making $70,000, $80,000 a year, going back to making 50. That sometimes that's a little hard. So you got to think about that as well. So that's what I'll say.
So I work with a lot of students every year that ask me the same question, and it all depends in the field, like Marguerite mentioned for her experience in English. But the way that I try to approach it when I talk to them, it's trying to define what is the role of a scientist, what is the role of that expertise. Research in particular happens here, not here. Research is not what you do in the lab. That's the technical aspect, and that's technique. Research is figuring out how to ask the right question, how to come up with a way to design an experiment that has controls that are tight enough that will give you a good confidence that the results that you're observing are actually either dismiss or support your hypothesis. Is the data interpretation. If what you want to do is work in science in a lab, in the technical aspects of it, definitely you don't need the PhD because you don't necessarily need the PhD. But if what you want to, what the training of the PhD does is turn you into a question asking, and question answering machine. You figure out how to approach the world using a systematic approach to answering questions, regardless of the field. At that point, then it depends on what does the student wants to do and what type of career they want to do. If they want to work in academia as a faculty professor, as a researcher in academia, definitely you have to get a PhD and you have to get a postdoc or 2 or 3. I didn't say that. If you want to work in industry, then it depends on what do you want to do, where do you want to start, and where do you want to move on. But the most important part that I tell students is then in trying to convince them of, I don't know. Most PhD programs, if you get accepted, if you decide not to, you will get the master's on the way, so you can move on after that. But the most important part of why getting the PhD, and the reason why I tell students to get a PhD, is because it's recession proof. It's employment for life, no matter what. During the 2008 recession, unemployment went up to 3.5% nationally, 3.54%. I know that after COVID, 3.5% unemployment sounds so quaint and little, but during that time, I was in the field, we were all freaking out. I met so many of my colleagues that lost a job on cutbacks and they couldn't find a job. Even though with that, even though nationally went out to almost 4%, among PhDs in the biomedical sciences, less than 1%. So we all had jobs. So if the one thing that having a PhD gives you is job stability, particularly if you're gonna work in science per se and in the field, be that academia or industry.
Great. So this is really good, right? We're kind of considering PhD for versus masters, but now I guess the next set of questions that got submitted kind of centers along how to choose your area that you plan to pursue for graduate studies. And so if you can share a little bit about perhaps some best practices on how to choose a program, how to choose a field, what would that like day-to-day life look like in a PhD program and the rigor? And if you could each talk about your specific areas, that would be awesome. Thanks.
So I'm happy to start on this one actually, because I do have this conversation with students a lot. My advice is don't worry about it too much. Again, science happens here, not here. So I can tell you a story. One of the postdocs in the lab where I was doing my PhD is in microbiology and molecular biology. And he transitioned from that. He decided he didn't want to do microbiology. He did another postdoc in a psychobiology lab. And now he's a faculty member in a psychology department at a different institution. So why? The same principles of science apply no matter the field. So if you're going for your PhD, you're learning how to do science. You're learning how to think in a systematic way. Then that means that pick a department or a field that you're passionate about, that you cannot, oh my God, you find joy on reading those hard papers, that you find excitement, even though to other people, it might seem like, how can you get fun out of learning about that particular thing? If it's close to you, that's the right field. Why? During your PhD, you're going to be kind of poor, you're going to be very stressed, and you're going to have a lot of demands on you. Might as well do that while working on something that you're passionate about. Then in terms of the PhD programs and how to pick it, 50% of your experience is going to be depending on what lab you're based in. You can go to the best school in the planet. If your PI or your lab is less than optimal, that's going to impact your lab. That's going to impact your life. For my postdoc, for example, I had a very different experience in my postdoc than my PhD. In my postdoc, my PI, he put effort into selecting people. We all had a voice onto who came in. We were a family. He did not allow competition. He did not allow so we had this great community. And my postdoc, even though I knew I didn't want to go into academia as a tenure track faculty member, the reason why I kept wanting to stay is because I love these people so much. And I love the environment so much. And that really impacted why I wanted to stay there. So you want to, part of your experience is going to be based on the lab, and then part of it is going to be based on the program, on the school, on the location, and how much they pay stipend, and how much teaching requirements you have. So balance that 50-50. And at the end, be aware that you can go to the best university, but at the end of the day, pay attention to which lab you're picking. And before you join them, make sure you meet people in the lab, outside of the lab, ask them those questions. How is the PI? How is the, are they, kind of, or are they sane? What are the benefits? And get that information before you choose that lab.
Yeah, I was gonna chime in here. I mean, I think that those are some really great points. And I think as I think back over my own career and some of the choices that I ended up making, I don't think that I gave a lot of the choices that I made in terms of lab and postdoc. If I probably were to tell you the reasons why I chose them, it wouldn't be uh optimal, but it all ended up working out, right? But I think because of those decisions that I made, I can also look back and see, okay, if I would have done X, Y, Z, I could have seen this path be a little bit more straight. But I think it also allows you to see that, you can get out here and take a winding path and still end up to where you want to be at. And so I guess I'll say for the industry part, so in undergrad, I mean, not in undergrad, but in graduate school, the project that I was focused on or the therapeutic area was male infertility, right? And I knew that I wanted to go in the industry, but I didn't think about the fact that there's no pharmaceutical companies making male infertility drugs, right? And so not my therapeutic area wasn't directly transferable, which gave more credence to the fact that, hey, you probably need to do a postdoc to change that therapeutic area, right? But at the same time, it was a great lab. I really got, trained as a scientist, right? I really got to understand how to ask great questions and things of that nature. So now that I'm switching fields into an area of oncology that I really want to be in, I was able to, make that transition and make everything work out. But I'll have friends that also went to grad school with me who their expertise were things like, hey, I make antibodies. That was my graduate project. And making antibodies is huge in the pharmaceutical industry. And so, she ended up being able to come out and go directly into a junior scientist position versus kind of being forced to do the postdoc, right? But that's not always the case. Sometimes you could study the perfect thing and still have to do a postdoc before you make the transition. But sometimes, what you study could make that next transition make a little bit more sense. And I'll also say that even when I was considering doing an academic postdoc, knowing that I wanted to stay or switch over into immuno-oncology, I had PIs ask me or tell me, I see where you're coming from in terms of your background and what you want to do. I'm not 100% sure that, this is going to be a seamless transition. And so, I would say that you should give it some thought, but it's also very hard to predict the future, right? Because you could end up studying something that you're like, I know this is totally going to get me a job, but you end up hating it. It could be in the wrong environment, and it also doesn't end up benefiting you. But if you could find something that is like, hey, I know this is pretty transferable. I'm finding a great lab to do this in. I've got a really great project. Then it could all end up working out. But again, that's a perfect story. And sometimes stuff doesn't always work out like that. I will say too that sometimes depending upon where you go to school at and who you work for could also offer you some opportunities or make some things a little bit easier in terms of fellowships and things of that nature. But again, there's no point in going to work for a big lab if you're not going to get the right training. So there's a lot of pros and cons to these things that you really want to consider. So I'll probably stop there.
I think that I mostly just agree with what's already been said. I would just say though, for I think the humanities and especially with English, I would if you're interested in pursuing a PhD, I would just think really, really carefully about it, just because the job market for English PhDs is very tough right now, and the profession is just changing a lot. So, you know, for example, if you're somebody who is interested in issues of like minority literature or racial issues, or, you know, gender and sexuality issues, some of my colleagues who are at, you know, state institutions in certain areas of the country are just facing increasing restrictions about what they can teach and say in the classroom. So I would say that just sort of as a general kind of note, that talk to a lot of people as, you know, you're making a decision about whether or not to pursue a PhD, if you want to become, like, say, a professor and academic. And I think for me, I'm sort of like also I was partly systematic about it, but also partly intuitive about it. Like, I feel like I'm the type of person who really goes by gut feeling. And so I just talk to a lot of people about, like, okay, I'm thinking about going to graduate school for Asian American literature, and specifically, you know, Vietnamese American literature, which was a field that didn't really exist at the time. What are your thoughts? So I would talk to, you know, faculty at different schools, writers, just a lot of different people. And I think my decision was very much informed by what they said. So some people would be very direct about, okay, if you want to do Asian American literature, you should go to California, unquestionably. So I think it's echoing what others have already said. You know, you do want to think about what specific programs can offer you in relationship to your interests, and what programs you think can really cultivate your curiosity and those interests. And for me, I really wanted a kind of, I was definitely committed to an English program, but I really am historically minded as well. So I wanted a school that could also give me access to Southeast Asian history. And there were only really a few schools that could offer that. And that actually narrowed down the options quite a bit. I also felt like it was very important to me to feel comfortable as a person of color in a graduate program, which, you know, the Leadership Alliance was so pivotal for me in terms of that, because I think the mentors of that program and the peers that I was placed with were just, you know, you knew what it felt like to have a community of students of color, and what that felt like, and the kind of, and how important that support would be. And so that was something that I really looked for when I was exploring programs. And I really felt that it was important to, like, have a life outside of grad school. And so that's why Berkeley for me was, it worked out well, and it was the right choice for me. Because if you think about it, you know, for a literature program, it's a big chunk of your life, you know, and, you know, depending on how you work, maybe you like to kind of, you know, burrow in a certain place, and it's fine if you don't have, say, a broader Asian American community to kind of like interact with. But for me, it was really important to kind of have that and have a life outside of the academic work. And so that actually for me became kind of an easy answer, like, where should I go? And I think as far as like the day-to-day life, I think that, lifestyle, you know, you won't have a lot of money probably when you're a graduate student. And so you do have to be very passionate about it. And you also have to be okay, I think, with realizing that a lot of it's going to be tedious. Like, I'm very passionate about my topic, but sometimes I really hate writing that article, you know, and I'm just like, I want to be done with it. And I have like 3 deadlines that are overdue right now, right? But you have to be okay with with that sort of work aspect of it, as long as the bigger picture that you have in mind, you know, makes it all worthwhile. And I would say that, like, you know, it's just as in any aspect of life, just cultivate your community. So I never felt like I was really at the center of graduate student life at Berkeley, but I found my cohort, and they were so essential, and I think helping me to get through it. And the vibe of the mentors and the advisors was super important, because there are a lot of egos, you know, in academia, and I'm not that I know, right? And I just knew that I didn't want that. And so I tried to kind of, you know, work with people who I thought, you know, related well to, or just were experts in the fields that I wanted to study, but also, I don't know, we're just good people, I guess, to put it simply. So that would be those are my recommendations.
Amber, before we go to the next question, I just realized that I kept my scientist hat on, and I forgot that I'm supposed to talk about careers in higher education. So just briefly, if you're interested in working in higher education, more in the administrative side and the programmatic side and the student affairs and academic affairs side, you can combine a bachelor's degree or a master's in science with a master's in public administration or a master's in higher education administration. There's many out there. They prepare, they really give you some special skills and some good understanding of the type of skills that you need to succeed in academia or an academic environments that are not necessarily related to being a faculty or professor. I like to say at John Jay, we have amazing students, talented, brilliant faculty, but without us, they wouldn't find each other. They couldn't find even the classroom to meet. So that's what we do as administrators. We are the glue that puts together the college. The other option also, if you want to pursue a PhD in science, there are postdocs out there. I believe the name is ARACDA. I don't remember what it stands for, but it's a combined postdoc where you do 50% in the lab, 50% teaching at a community college or public institution. And in general, that gives you both a good teaching experience, but also during your postdoc, you get to learn about how a university runs and what are the type of roles that are necessary. There are leadership certificates for higher education too that you can complete. But what I will say is that although I use my skills as a scientist every day. As I mentioned, scientists, we're just question answering machines. That's what we do. And that is a very transferable skill. Having the PhD allowed me to come into John Jay, and I was able to speak to my colleagues in the faculty one-on-one. I was able to get into rooms that some of my colleagues in the administrations couldn't get in. I was able to come into the culture of academia with the same track record and professionalization as the faculty members. At the same time, while being an administrator, I had my roles to learn and my roles to do. So it allowed me really to be able to come in, frankly, at a higher pay rate, at a higher title, and it allowed me to be able to transition better into a leadership role. When they created my position, it was meant for an academic advisor. I came in, I did that for a few months, and I'm like, that's not enough for me. I want to do more. Get me a grant. Let's get grants. Let's get funds. Let's get do this. Let's try an experiment on the students. How do we help them succeed at John Jay? What activities can we test? And so that's how I use my science, my training in science, in a new field.
Great, thanks so much. So I think this is really helpful information to hear about what PhD programs are like and what, students can expect. And so the next set of questions that we received kind of focuses on how to prepare for a PhD program, right? So many of our audience are undergraduates, community college students. And so can each of you please share, in your opinion, what type of experiences make a strong candidate for applying to a PhD program? What can you recommend? Like what kind of skill sets can they start working on developing? So with regards to networking or research experiences, or anything else that you think is relevant?
I'll start, and I'm going to give a big one. Communication, 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 right? You have to understand that you're going to, in terms of this process of applying to grad school, you're going to need to communicate what you do writtenly. And then once you actually get in front of people, you're going to have to be able to do it orally, right? And you have to be able to, when I say tell a story, you got to be able to understand that it's not necessarily I added 10 microliters of buffer A to buffer Y, and I put this in a thermocycler at 95 degrees. So that's not what people are looking for. They want to understand that you can say, here's the big problem, right? Here's the question that we sought out to answer to address that problem, right? This is what we did at a very high level, and this was the results of what we did. You got to be able to tell that story in a long form, a short form, and a compelling form, right? And that is what is going to be able to show people that you understand or you're ready to go into a graduate program. Now, I'm saying this like this is a skill you should perfect, but I mean, at every level, this is something that they're working on with everybody, right? So you're going to learn this process through grad school. You're going to learn it as a postdoc, right? Even if you become a scientist at a pharmaceutical company, you're going to need to learn how to do that. But this is how people are always going to be able to gauge, are you ready for the opportunity, right? Can you be able to tell a nice, cohesive story to be able to get and drive home, this is what I did. I understand the scientific process. And if you can do that and really be able to show, your interest or your drive, that's gonna open up a ton of doors for you. So you gotta learn how to communicate. That's a really important part of this.
I'm gonna cut down that piece of this webinar, and I'm just gonna play it to my students over and over, because Phillips, yes, it is essential. You can have, as an expert, as a researcher, as a scientist, you can have the best ideas, you can have the best results, you can have results that will change the world. If you cannot communicate them, did you really have them? Otherwise, they're just stuck in your head. And I do like what you said about being able to tell your story on that personal statement, not just I mix A plus B and C happened. It's about the idea that drives the research, the big picture, how does your project fit within that picture? So in addition to that, I think most of you are doing something essential, which is the summer research projects and research programs during the year in your academic institution. The best way to demonstrate to a future employer, to a program administrator, to a admission officials that you can do what you're setting up to do is by having done it already. So for pre-med students, that's why it requires clinical experience. We know no one's gonna let you do any surgery on anyone. We know you're not gonna be diagnosing anyone, but by being in that environment, you can demonstrate I can survive it. I like it. I can thrive in it. Same for undergraduate research. I'm sorry, for careers in research and as PhD programs. No one expects you to have already discovered Nobel Award-winning research, but we want to make sure that you know what it's like to be in a lab day to day. You know the frustration of never getting exactly what you want. Research is 90% figuring out why stuff is not working. When I tell that to my students in person, I use a different S instead of stuff, or when I say that phrase. So being able to demonstrate that I already have this research experience, I already spent 6 months in which nothing works. I know how painful it is. So I can do this professionally. So what you're doing and the fact that you're here, you're on your way. So just keep doing that.
I think on like a very basic level, just might be a good idea to sort of look at programs that you might want to apply to and see what the requirements are, and just to be sure that you have some of those requirements. So I think for a lot of humanities programs, it'll be like you have to kind of submit a research paper of a certain length to with your application, and I had forgotten about this, but actually the project that I wrote for Leadership Alliance was the project I ended up using for my graduate school application, and it worked out. So I think, along the lines of, what's been said, keep doing what you're doing, get a sense of what basic requirements the schools want. And start sort of, I guess, packaging that interest and that curiosity into some sort of narrative that will be kind of graspable to the people who might be reading, your application. So yeah, I think that's, yeah. Otherwise, just be prepared to feel unprepared, because I feel like once I got to the program, I was just surrounded by these people with master's degrees in high theory, and I was like, oh my God, I have no idea what y'all are talking about. So you can kind of prepare to a certain extent, and just be okay with where you are, because you'll get into the program that's best for you, I think.
I was gonna say the last thing too, another way that you potentially could do it is, and this is a very hard and probably non-traditional method, but if you could identify a professor or groups of professors at an institution that you want to go to and you reach out to them in a tailored fashion, whether it be, hey, I read your last publication and I have some questions or something of that nature, and you start to build a relationship with them where it's like, hey, I would love for this student to come and work for me, then that also is another way of getting somebody to go to that admissions committee and say, I have this student, I think they'll be a great fit. So it's another way to gain an advocate, right? And I think, the other way is to start to make the case of why you should do your graduate training at a certain institution and making that case to the admissions committee. Whether it be you find something unique about this school, whether it be professors that work there, certain programs that they offer, classes, resources that they have. Just knowing the place that you're applying to say, hey, I want to study XYZ. You guys have XYZ that would help me accomplish that. And, this will be the perfect marriage. That sometimes also is another way to help make the case of you getting accepted into a certain school.
Can I add on to that? Because I think that what you said is so important. And I think that also you might think about you maybe not pinning your hopes on like one faculty member because that person might leave. So when you're exploring programs, preferably there's several faculty with whom you might want to work. And that's something that I did. I called a bunch of faculty at the schools, and there were some that were more responsive than others. And the person who was most responsive ended up becoming my advisor and still writes me like recommendation letters to this day. So I think that is really great advice to like identify people that you might want to work with and contact them and maybe have a conversation with them, because that says a lot about the program too, I think.
Wow, this is such great advice and tips for our students. And so with our remaining time, I know I want to be mindful of everyone's time. Can each of you please share a tip, a word of wisdom, advice, something that you wish you knew as an undergrad? And this could be with respects to schooling, with research, wellness, work-life balance, whatever it is that you feel would be most helpful to our students.
I'm happy to start. First one is, it's okay to not have all the answers. We all, careers are seldom straightforward. And through life, you will discover what you like, what you're good at, what you really don't like, what are things that you can live with, and where are things that you really do not want to have that. So it's okay to not have all the answers, but don't self-exclude because you don't know exactly what the path is going to be. So apply to everything that sounds interesting. The worst thing that happens is that you don't get it. If you got it, it's better to have 5 options and pick between one than find yourself with no options at the end. So as you're gonna get a lot of emails from college, from people in your college that have my roles. Hey, there's the Leadership Alliance, there's the Big Ten Alliance, there's this, apply to this, apply to that. Apply, give them a read. Start applying, start learning how to apply, open yourself to opportunities, and don't self-exclude. And then the second one, which is, that's the approach that I took. The one that I regret is that I was afraid a little bit of the unknown and what I was not comfortable with. So I did my PhD in a lab that did stuff I already knew how to do. And because of that, during my PhD, I didn't get to grow as much technically and as a scientist. That's why my postdoc was so essential for me. So don't be afraid of learning, and don't be afraid of learning and just jumping from field to field. Also, you can do many things, and at the end, your title and the name of your field is less important than how satisfied are you with at the end of the day. So that's what you should hopefully be looking for.
I think I try to drop in 2 things. I think the first one, and this is gonna sound general, is that when you enter into grad school, one of the things you gotta remember is that there is light on the other end of that tunnel. And what I mean by that is when you come into school, those first 2 years, I'm not gonna say they're gonna be peachy, but you're gonna start to figure out like, okay, like I did some rotations, found out where I want to go, found the lab. Then you're gonna qualify. You're gonna think, I know what I'm about to do for the next X number of years. And then things may fall apart project wise, right? You get into sometimes these ruts where you start to feel trapped of like this project is never gonna work out, never gonna graduate, I'm gonna be stuck here forever. And that's not true. Once you end up finishing this, there's light on the other side. You will get to the place that we all are. You will see that it was all worth it. Grad school is going to seem like an eternity. It's going to seem like your entire life. And then when you get out of it, you're going to be like, dang, man, that was really fast. And, I ended up learning a ton through all of that trauma that I just went through. But, you just got to keep it in mind that once you finish this, I promise it will all be worth it. And I think the other thing that you have to remember while you're in this is that comparison is the thief of joy. Because you're going to do a ton of comparison while you're in school. You're going to have other classmates that you're going to be like, okay, they're graduating now. Like, I don't feel like I'm even close to graduating. And you're going to think that reflects on you as a scientist. It doesn't, right? You're going to see other people that get projects that are just, the projects happen to be set up well. They happen to work out well. They finish fast. They got a great publication. But that doesn't say a lot about them as a scientist versus you as a scientist. It's just sometimes the luck of the draw, right? And then you're also going to start to see, other people that you went to school with that maybe didn't go get a PhD that are doing other things. I used to say all the time, I remember my 3rd year in school, I started looking back on social media. I'm seeing people getting MBAs, buying houses, getting married. And I'm like, I still got a long time to go before I get there. But you gotta block all that stuff out and just sometimes put on your blinders to say, this is my story, this is my situation. And at the end of the day, it's gonna be what it is, and it's gonna be a beautiful story because it's yours. So just remember that when you get into some of these tough times, because you're signing up for a challenge, but again, like I said, it will be all worth it at the end of the day.
I think that again, from a humanities perspective, if I were to talk to my younger self, I would encourage that my younger self to think about, try as much as possible to project into the long term. And that's really hard to do when you're like very passionate about a topic and want to go to grad school. But I think that one thing if you are interested in becoming a professor and a scholar teacher, you don't have much control. Unlike, I think, industry, that's another route. But like if you're committed to becoming a professor, there's not much control over where you live. So for many of my colleagues, if you're lucky, you'll end up in an area you want to be in, but you sort of have to go where the job is, and then you have to kind of like get to know how to perform roles that graduate school doesn't really teach you. So especially like the bureaucratic administrative roles. I think the more senior you get, you actually have more of those responsibilities that can kind of take away from your research, so that's just a part of the job that you sort of have to think about. But I think that's true of any job. So, kind of thinking about lifestyle questions and the kinds of lives you want to build, there are certain things that may not be easy to accommodate if you're committed to a professorial route in the humanities. But I like the advice about like, just kind of believing in yourself and knowing that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and also sort of taking advantage of opportunities, because sometimes if you just sort of pay attention and and are open to the different opportunities that come up that are related to your interests, it can really lead to unexpected things. So toward the end of my graduate career, when I just really thought I wasn't going to get a job because there was a recession in 2008, I decided to help a local documentary filmmaker, with making films. And that ended up becoming the basis for my second book project. And that was a completely unexpected turn. But yeah, I think that just take advantage of the opportunities, believe in yourself, surround yourself with people who believe in you too, and you'll be good.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. I know we're at time. So thank you, students, for joining us. Leadership Alliance, thank you for inviting our panelists. And then, of course, our panelists, thanks for sharing your expertise with us. Hope you all have a good day.